Cymatic schematics, mind passages, active, climactic rhyme patterns, divine facets shine in the blackness. Third eye aligned with the atlas, master the madness, blurred signs and immaculate passages, like kids lacking a master. Galactic vastness, I write to wizards, oracular passages. I'm the gladdest of bastards when I rap mathematical data on this astral ladder. This had to be fathomed by Her Majesty's atoms. I grasp the tree of Adam, freeze the blasphemous as I free the magic from the breezes passing. The degrees you're grasping, decease your past ghastly. I breathe till I pass speech, past the vast regions you never asked or believed in, past the last season. Brass tacks on a fractal gleaming on my room's wall, a Buddhic tattoo of a god. Truly the past rulers were the most modest, coast on lost oceans, farther than moss rolling on rocks golden. In forgotten solar systems drop these nodes that glisten, soul focused in bars that grow lotuses and bottles unholy.
All right, shalom. Today I am bringing up a topic, the tree of life. The tree of life. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the dilemma for us today. I've been studying this topic for, I would say, a little over a year. Just this specific, or maybe two. Maybe about 2 years. And this is the conclusion I have come to thus far in my walk, or in my just studying. What is the tree of life? And what is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Because we see when we read that Adam partook, or Eve partook of this tree, and it was a tree to make one wise, to know good and evil. So what's wrong with good and evil, and how did we fall? This is what I've been looking at, and this is the conclusion I have came to so far, and what we have to get back to. So where we fell from, what I believe we fell from, which is the tree of life, is a consciousness or a mindset that all is one. And once we partook of the fruit of good and evil, which the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is just two opposites, or two poles, a polarity. We fell into a polarity mind frame. What do I mean? We fell into a mind frame of discrimination, or of separating. And we get carried away by this separation and identification. So to know good and evil, I think, is just a sum of what comes out of partaking of this fruit. What do I mean? Well, since it says, since mankind has partaken of the fruit, they began to understand they were naked. So identity comes into play, meaning you're identifying with self. You're naked. Okay, you distinguish yourself from another, and not as one whole. And it's the same with good and evil. You distinguish what is good from what is evil. You make separations. So this polarity we have partook of means we don't see the poles as a whole. Like if you have a north and south pole, the north and south pole is the same thing, just on different ends of the plane, or stick, should I say. What do I mean? For instance, hot and cold are the same things. It's just what degree, just different degrees of the same thing. They're just degrees. It's the same with good and evil. In our mind frame of, or our identification with the polarities, is why we're in the place we're at. What do I mean? For instance, we identify with things that we are not. We don't understand that we're everything. We understand that we or our mind frame in this, since we have partaken of this fruit, is we think we are a body, okay? Which we're not our bodies, but we think we're our bodies. And then sometimes we think we are our mind if we don't think we're our bodies, our thoughts. We're not even our thoughts, but we identify with our body. We identify ourselves as our thoughts, with things we are not. And so since we identify with them, we find ourselves in grave suffering. What do I mean? Well, since we identify with the body, a lot of times we identify with our looks, how we are perceived, this, that, and the third. So if we're perceived negatively, guess what? Because if we're perceived negatively because of our body, we tend to get depressed. Why? Because we're identifying with something we are not. The same with the mind. When thoughts come into the mind, because the mind is not us either. You could try to keep your mind blank for 60 seconds, and I bet you can't, because you are not your mind. Thoughts come in and out of this thing we call mind. And a lot of the times our mind controls us, and we do not control it as we should, because we identify with the mind. If a thought pops in, we think that thought is us thinking. What do I mean? For instance, we are caught, when we partook of the tree of good and evil, we have partaken in identifying ourselves with our body, our feelings, our mind, what we like, what we dislike. For instance, likes and dislikes. We get caught up when we get caught up in likes and dislikes, in our strong opinions or our habits, our firm habits that we can't break. We don't work at our best. And we cannot know true freedom either. Because a lot of people say, well, I'm going to do what I like. Well, guess what? You are controlled by your likes. You understand? Or what you feel more comfortable doing. You are controlled by. And it's like you're going a straight path where you have no flexibility to turn. Okay? And what does that do? If you're driving in a car and you can't turn, eventually you're going to crash. So if you have strong likes and you eventually don't get that like, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get depressed. But the freedom that the tree of life offers is a peace that is beyond all peace. So understanding reality in the nature of it, which if you're stuck in the good and evil, the swing of the poles, it's like a pendulum. If I hold a pendulum up and I swing it to the right, it's guaranteed, because of the laws of this world, that it's going to swing to the left with the same amount of strength. What is that showing you? That on this pole, if I like something very much, if it's taken away from me, I will be very much depressed. And that's the state we find ourselves in when we have partook of the knowledge of good and evil. We are conditioned by compulsive likes and dislikes, our habits, our opinions. No one is really free in life when they are controlled by their habits, opinions, dislikes, judgments. Okay? It's like something, we are all sick in this condition. There's a story that the Buddha told to a man who is trying to find salvation. A lot of us think, doing good is salvation. Or you cannot find the creator in a dichotomy of good and evil. Because for instance, if God is the ruler of the kingdom of good, who is the ruler of the kingdom of evil? Well, some people will say the devil. But if God created all things, isn't God in control of the devil? So how can the devil be in control of the kingdom of evil? See, we have to get rid of notions. In order to partake of the tree of life, we have to get rid of notions and concepts of good and evil. They have to be removed. This is the way our mind perceives things, and we are not our mind. So until you get even removed from your mind, you will not be able to seek union with the Creator. If we look at God as the root of all things, as the root of being, then who is the root of non-being? You understand? That's a polarity of being and non-being. If God is the root of good, well, who is the root of evil? If God is the root of good and the creator of all good, who is the creator of evil? And I'm saying this for a reason, because this is when you partake of the fruit of good and evil, you look at things, this is evil, this is good. So we cannot think of God in terms of good and evil. Because a lot of people think you add an O to good and you got God. You add a D to evil and you got the devil. And that's a wrong mind frame and a wrong concept. God is above the term good and evil. He is not good or evil. He is above it. He goes beyond good and evil, beyond these terms and concepts and notions. The true right view is a view that is above both good and evil. Like I said before, if God is in control of the kingdom of goodness, who is in control of the kingdom of evil? If we're stuck partaking of this tree of good and evil, we're going to always look at separateness. God is on this side, devil's on this side. So I ask you again, if God is in control of the kingdom of goodness, who is in control of the kingdom of evil? Ultimately, if you say the devil, then God is not in control of all things. But if you have a true concept of the tree of life, which this is my understanding as of now, God transcends ultimately the notion of both good and evil. He is neither. He is above both. And until you see that, you cannot see the plan of God. Because a lot of people, even me, I used to be, capitalism is evil, right? And we fight against this is evil, and what we're trying to do is good. Which if I'm partaking in the tree of good and evil and have all these knowledges, yeah, you can say that. But it also says in the scriptures that God is in control of these kingdoms. What is his purpose to put this capitalism here for? It must have an ultimate purpose. And the Creator is in control of that. And we're trying to fight the Creator's will at times, and because we don't fully see God's plan or his intention. So we say, if God is so compassionate, why did he create death and disasters and tsunamis and tempests and all these? Why has he allowed all these things to happen? Like when a terrorist, so-called terrorist, bombs places, they are trying to teach you a lesson. You understand? They say, this is to learn. This is for your good. But when we partake of the tree of good and evil, we are stuck in this rut, this dichotomy of this and that, me and you. There is no oneness. So our mind is inclined to think what is good does not cause suffering. Only bad things cause suffering. So, for instance, capitalism causes suffering, so it is bad. That is our mind in its dualistic nature, or the nature after it has partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That mind separates. We shouldn't use this mind to try to understand the Creator. The ultimate way to touch the Creator, to get in union with the Creator, is to remove these notions, good, bad, like and dislike, body, mind, God. The ultimate way to touch the Creator is to remove these notions. Everything is a wonder. There is no good and evil in it. It's only the mind that has these concepts and notions. And you are not the mind, remember that. Only the mind comes up with these, and we get swept away with the thoughts of the mind when we identify with it. Don't identify with something that isn't you. When we do that, we suffer. What do I mean? When we get caught up in what is good, when that good gets taken away and evil takes place, we suffer. Remember, Christ said, I came to bring you a peace that is above all peace. That is an understandable peace. It's not understandable. Why? Because in this world, it's always going to be up and down. That's just the nature of the world. It's always going to be summer, winter, summer, winter. But if you get attached to summer, when winter comes, you're going to be depressed and you will not have peace. So as long as we attach ourselves to things that come and go, which thoughts come and go, our bodies come and go, as long as we are attached to these polarities of being and non-being, good and evil, like, dislike, up, down. If you get attached to one and the other comes, how can you say you're in peace? Once you get detached is when you can love all things equally, as the Creator says. You cannot have partiality. But when you're attached, you have partiality. For instance, I love my wife. Most people will protect their wife above all others, or their kids above all others. It's because you're partial. You have attachments because your mind has told you this is what I should do. But the Creator has no respect of person. Because when you partake of the tree of life, you have no respect of person because you are separated from all things. You're not attached. So when you're separated from all things, you can love all things equally, even the thoughts that come in your mind. Don't identify with something that isn't you. We shouldn't try to understand God with this mind of duality. It's only the mind that has these notions. When we do that, when we identify with things that are not us, we suffer. These notions are useful, meaning me, you, they're useful, but when we get caught in them or identify with them, we suffer. For instance, if I'm sitting here, you will see that my body is here. Sometimes my mind can be somewhere else, and who you truly are is somewhere else. Once there is space between you and your mind, then what the mind is doing is not even an issue, because sometimes we get caught up. For instance, let me give you an example. Because again, once we partake of this tree of life, it's all peace. A peace that is undescribable. That's what the scriptures say. Once we put a distance between what we truly are, and our mind, because a lot of us identify with the mind, which it causes suffering. Once we put space between us and the mind, then whatever the mind is doing is not an issue. We can observe the mind and not get caught up in thoughts that keep us up all night. We can notice it and put it to rest if we don't want it, or use it if we do want it. Let me give you an example. Like if we're stuck in a traffic jam, right? It's a stressful situation for a lot of people, being stuck in a traffic jam. Because you're in it. Same with our thoughts. When we get in our thoughts, they cause us distress. If you get caught up with likes, the pendulum will swing the opposite way and you will be caught up in the same dislike of the same thing. But again, when we're stuck in a traffic jam, it's stressful. But imagine you're in a hot air balloon and distance yourself from the traffic and look at the traffic from above. It looks peaceful and beautiful. Why? Because you have distance. When you're in it, you're negative. when it's jammed. But when that jam gets free, you're elated when it's flowing again, because you're caught in the good and evil polarity. When you're stuck in traffic, you're hot, you're stressful. Once that traffic clears, you're at ease again, you're at peace, because you're stuck in this dichotomy of the poles, the good and evil. You have to come out of that where nothing affects you, not the good or the evil. You don't swing this way when it's good, and you don't swing that way when it's evil. So so when you separate from the mind and when you get that distance, the mind will never cause you problems, because thoughts continuously flow in and out of consciousness. The problem is the moment we identify with something that we're not, we tend to suffer. The moment we jump into notions and thoughts as though they're us, we suffer. When you identify with things that you are not, you suffer. And when you do not identify with things that you are not, you know how to be with everything and how to use everything, but you're not identified with it. So when things run through our mind, you can use it freely. This is the secret to getting to the tree of life. Now, the next step is, how do you implement it? How do you free yourself from your mind and from your body? Because again, when our body tells us to be hungry, we don't even think. We just go get something to eat. You're not even controlling your body. Your body controls you most of the time. Your body tells you it's hungry, you feed it. But if your dog tells you you're hungry, sometimes you don't feed it. That dog's not you either. But do you know how to separate and at the same time be one with everything? This is the dichotomy we face. And there was a story that the Buddha shared with a man one time. And he said, mankind is sick and we're stuck. And basically what he's saying is we're stuck partaking of the fruit of good and evil, because we think that, for instance, being stuck in this dichotomy is like a man with chicken pox. When a man scratches, or as a matter of fact, he said leprosy. When a man scratches his sores, it feels so good. It gives him pleasure. And this is what we're stuck in. We like to get pleasure. So we scratch it. That gives us pleasure, right? But after a while, it begins to itch again, which gives a man pain or discomfort. So what does he do? He goes to please himself. He scratches it again. Oh, that feels good. And you're going after your pleasure. And people think that's what life is about, getting pleasure. But the Buddha said, again, and scratching yourself is the good side. The discomfort is the evil side. And when you're stuck in that dichotomy, you think that pleasure is the best thing. Scratching that sore is the best thing. But the Buddha said there's something even more than that. He said, people are so happy and elated when they scratch, and it feels so good. But there's an even better feeling, a joy that surpasses that pleasure. And the man said, well, what is it? He said, if I cured you from that disease, you wouldn't scratch no more, would you? Or you wouldn't get sad or discomforted when the itch came back, if you were cured. And this is the state mankind is in. Partaking of the fruit of good and evil, we go back and forth with evil and good and evil and good. Learn how to transcend it to where neither affects you anymore. Heal yourself. And so this is the path laid. Now you must find for yourself the practical steps to get there. Stop identifying with the body. Stop identifying with the mind. Stop identifying with their emotions. None of these are you. And as long as you identify with them, you will be carried with the waves of life, the ups and downs of life. So that is all that I have or all of my understanding as of now about the tree of life and the knowledge of good and evil. Because again, even our feelings, when we have likes and dislikes, people think that, oh man, they tell you never get depressed, but nobody ever tells you never get excited. Why? Because they don't even understand that the more you get excited, okay? Because whether we're excited or depressed, the mind is still spinning out of control. Okay? When you're excited, you're elated and your mind's spinning out of control, and it's the same as when you're depressed. People will tell you don't get depressed, but they never tell you to not get excited because they are stuck in the dichotomy of good and evil. The only difference is whether it's spinning over what is pleasant or what is unpleasant when you're excited or depressed. And the mind is agitated when it's excited and when it's depressed. So the middle course is how you overcome. Don't get pushed too far to the left or to the right. Stay in the middle path. What's the scripture say? But even between excitement and depression is the way. And people think, well, if I don't get excited or depressed, I'm resigning myself to being flat and nothing. But that's far from it, okay? This third state, which is neither good or evil, this third state is what we are all called to, where there's neither good nor evil, excitement nor depression, in which we can go beyond these two extremes. And this is where you find that abiding joy of what we are truly to be. Just like I said with the story with the Buddha, with the man with leprosy, he's excited because he's scratching his sores and it feels so good. But then after a while, that same discomfort comes back. As good as it felt to scratch it, as discomforting as it feels when the itch comes back. But the middle path is eliminating those extremes to where they do not affect you. So with that, I will say peace.
All life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and it is. It wouldn't be life if there were not a temporality involved, which is sorrow, loss.
That's a pessimistic move.
Well, you can say yes to it, say it's great this way, it's the way God intended it.
You don't really believe that?
But this is the way it is. And I don't believe anybody intended it, but this is the way it is. And Joyce's wonderful line, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. And the way to awake from it is not to be afraid and to recognize, as I did in my conversation with that Hindu guru or teacher that I told you of, that all of this as it is as it has to be, and it is a manifestation of the eternal presence in the world.
Across ages, thought waves disseminate in block pages. Modern day stargazing, charting the mazes of the farthest constellations, parting the veil of lost mystical conquered nations. Pardon my dazing, I'm awe-stricken by this oral fable, a lore of ancients. Floral glades blossom from its aura, amazing flora in uncharted spaces. Words pacing of the fauna, sparsely phrasing, singing a song of praises in an art that's ageless, as birds play in the waters where the ark waited, while archangels swayed and became darker deities, in half-lighted places as the darkness faded, their conscience made of a past life's oasis, on a path with light bathing it, a goddess strays
In the catacombs of this subconscious age, I tag along with a cautious gaze, modest ways, as my thoughts displayed become a torch that blazes. I have the longest and hardest days ahead of me. Better be precautious, aided by gods and deities. Let us gleam in the darkest places ever seen, teeming with clever demons of nether regions. Yet benevolence sees them and forever frees them. Breezes tread the freshest leaves of a precious tree and spread the breath of the species, the blessed seed. Blessed we, yes indeed, meekly blessed in deeds, lesson heeded in messages, effortless speeches. My profession is breathing, like testaments readings, the vestiges of secrets confessed to a priestess, the effigies of Jesus, deathly and speechless. Heaven can free you, but your destiny needs you. Resting in peace is lethal, read of messages deep and see through evil. Speak to what's left of the people, meek and peaceful, yet bleak and restless and sequel. Seek the rest of the pieces of our desperate freedom and seize who you're destined to be in this desolate season.